Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Scraps and Locos of Britain. Each week we'll take a look at a class of locomotives that didn't make it into preservation. All of these classes will be standard gauge and owned by either a pre-grouping railway company, one of the big four railway companies, and or British Railways. While some classes will get a new build number, most of these classes will be scrapped and likely remain scrapped. Here we go. Our next episode is on the LNER B16. Following the races to the north of 1895, the Great Northern Railway, Northeastern Railway, London and Northwestern Railway, and Caledonian Railway all decided to focus more on passenger comfort rather than speed. Another result of the races was an increase in passenger traffic along the West Coast and East Coast main lines. In 1899, the Northeastern Railway's locomotive superintendent, Wilson Worsdale, introduced the S-Class 460s for express passenger work. The class was based on Worsdale's earlier R-Class 440s. These were based on the M1 and Q-Class 440s. The S-Class gained a reputation for being the first British 460s to be used on express passenger work. Sadly, unlike the R-Class, the S-Class were poor performers due to the fire grate being too shallow. This same problem would later hinder some of the Great Central 460s. In 1903, the class was succeeded by the V-Class Atlantics. This saw the S-Class bumped down to freight trains, mail trains, and occasional summer holiday excursions. Although the S-Class was unsuccessful, Worsdale wanted to show that a 460 would be the right locomotive for express passenger work on the Northeastern Railway. Therefore, Worsdale simply enlarged the design of the S-Class to create the S1 in 1900, with the hopes that this class would be much more successful. However, they proved to be only slightly more capable than their predecessors, and because the parts on the S1s could not be interchanged with the S-Class, this resulted in the S1s having higher maintenance costs. In 1904, the S1s were displaced from express passenger duties by the R, R1, and V classes. Also, like their predecessors, the S1s were mainly used on fast freight trains until the 1930s. In 1910, Worsdale retired and was replaced by Vincent Raven. Raven noticed the growing need for a locomotive powerful enough and fast enough for express passenger work and express freight traffic. He also noticed that the S and S1 classes were starting to struggle with an increase in traffic. As a result, Raven introduced the S2 class 460s in June 1911. Although they were classified as mixed traffic, the S2s were first tried out on passenger trains rather than freight trains. However, like their predecessors, they proved to be unsuccessful. However, unlike the S1s, the S2s were cheaper to maintain due to their boilers and cylinders being interchangeable with the T2-080s. Shortly after the class was introduced, the S2s were displaced from passenger traffic by the Z-Class Atlantics. After the First World War, the NER noticed an increase in both passenger and freight traffic. This strained the limits of the S-Class, the S1 class, and the S2 class. Raven noticed this and decided that the best course of action was to build a 3-cylinder version of his S2s. The Northeastern Railway's first three-cylinder locomotives were Wilson Wurztel's X-Class 480 tanks of 1909 and his Y-Class Pacific tanks of 1910. The arrangement proved to be so successful that Raven used it on his Z-Class Atlantics in 1911 and his D-Class 444 tanks in 1913. Unlike Nigel Gresley's conjugated arrangement, as used on his O2 Class 280s in 1915, all three cylinders drove the same axle using Stephenson link motion and divided drive. On the X-Class, all three sets of valve gear drove the second axle. On the Y, Z, and D classes, meanwhile, all three sets of valve gear powered the first driving axle rather than the second. This valve gear layout was much easier to maintain than the conjugated layout. As well as having three cylinders, the new 460 would also feature superheating, which was first fitted to the Z-Class Atlantics. This would increase the locomotive's heating surface and allow for better steaming as a result. The new 460s would be classified as S3, with the first 5 members appearing in December 1919 from Darlington Works. The S3s had a 180 pounds per square inch, 5'6" boiler, and 18.5 by 26" cylinders, both of which were interchangeable with the T3-080s. The driving wheels were 5'8" and the tractive effort was 30,032 pounds. The first 4 were allocated to Heaton, whilst number 844 was allocated to York North. The class proved to be so successful that another 10 were built at Darlington between March and April 1920. That June also saw another locomotive, number 906, emerge from Darlington. The largest batch of locomotives appeared between August 1920 and June 1921, with 24 members. The next batch of 20 locomotives appeared between November 1922 and August 1923. However, only the first 3, numbers 2363 to 2365, were built by the Northeastern Railway. Following the groupings of 1923, the LNER reclassified the S3s as B16s. The last 15 locomotives were built between October 1923 and January 1924, bringing the class total to 70 locomotives. The class's boilers were fitted with 109 flue tubes, but 7 of these had stays. In 1933, the stays were removed to increase the heating surface. Other modifications made by the LNER included replacing the driving wheel axle boxes on the B16s with solid bronze axle boxes. These also had forged steel horn stays and cast steel horn guides. The B16s also received laminated springs, mechanical lubricators, new crankshafts, and modified coupling rods. All of these modifications allowed the B16s to be used on fast freight services and express passenger services. There were also 3 variants. The B16-1s were the original Raven design. The B16-2s of 1937 were Gresley's rebuild with his conjugated valve gear layout and Walshart's valve gear arrangement attached to the lead driving axle. This arrangement had been used before on Gresley's D49 440s. To make this modification possible, the front bogie was moved forward by 9 inches, requiring the frames to also be extended. They also had a new cab and a raised running plate. There were 7 members of this variant, the first one being number 2364. Final variant of the B16s were the B16-3s. These were rebuilt by Edward Thompson, with Walshart's valve gear on all 3 cylinders attached to the lead axle. The class also had a higher running plate, a modified cab, and left-hand drive. Between 1944 and 1949, 17 B16-1s were rebuilt as B16-3s. The B16s were allocated around the Northeast. Being of a mixed traffic design, the class was used on a variety of duties, including fast freights, parcels traffic, and express passenger trains. During the 1930s, the B16s also hauled football specials and excursions along the Yorkshire coast, particularly in the summer. As was common practice, extra coaches would be added to these excursions to accommodate for more passengers. The B16s handled these heavy passenger trains with ease. During World War II, some of the B16s moved away from the northeast to the Great Central Main Line around Banbury and Woodford Halse. One member, number 925, was destroyed in an air raid on York on the night of the 28th of April, 1942. That same bomb also destroyed A4 Pacific number 4469 Sir Ralph Wedgwood, formerly named Gadwall. Both locomotives were sitting side by side when a bomb crashed through York North's shed. Both locomotives were the first of their class to be withdrawn and scrapped. A plaque remembering the 2 bombed locomotives and their crews can be found at the National Railway Museum at York. Back to the B16s. Even when Thompson's B1s came into the picture, the B16s still held on as they were still very capable machines. In 1946, the class was renumbered 1400 to 1468. All of the remaining 69 members passed into British Railways ownership. When inherited by British Railways, the B16s were renumbered initially to 61400 to 61468. However, numbers 61400 to 61409 were renumbered 61469 to 61478 during the early 1950s to give their old road numbers to the last 10 B1s being built. As well as football specials and summer excursions, the B16s were also popular for rail tours during the 1950s and 1960s. They also substituted for the B1s and V2s on trains as far south as Peterborough. The first withdrawal was number 61474 from Selby on the 31st of January 1958. The introduction of diesels and the class's overall age meant that withdrawals were very rapid. The B16-1s were the first members to go, being extinct by 1961. However, the last member to go was number 61435 from Hull Dairycoats on the 21st of July, 1964. Interestingly, number 61435 was also the first of the B16-2s. None of the B16s survived into preservation. This series was inspired by Locomotives of Great Britain, by Rail Air Land and Sea, and Top 10 Extinct British Steam Locomotives by Pendennis Castle. Links to both their channels are in the description below. If there are any extinct British steam locomotives you would like me to cover, feel free to let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, and you would like to see more videos like this in the future, then feel free to like and subscribe. Be sure to tune in next week when I cover the Southeastern and Chatham Railway E-Class 440s. Take care everyone, goodbye for now.